Hey everyone, welcome to another video with All You Can Board. I'm Carlo, and as always I'm here with my cousin Dylan, and today we have finally reached what has probably been the most anticipated video on our channel for a while, just based on how much we love these games and find ourselves kind of discussing and often arguing about these games on almost every video, and that is of course Agricola versus A Feast for Odin. The time has come. How does it feel, Dylan?
This has been a long time in the making. This has basically been, at least for the last year, I feel like when we first started to really adopt this rivalry between us and between these games, and it's only heightened as we've had a Discord and more fans talking about it and stuff. Yeah. And so we have full on sides being lines in the sand being drawn in our Discord with people would be like, oh, I'm introducing myself in the Discord, and by the way, hashtag Team Agricola. People are taking sides when they sign up to join us, which is pretty wild. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really fun video.
Nice, awesome. Well, before we get into the games themselves, we do want to mention we recently hit a huge milestone on our channel on YouTube, which is 10,000 subscribers. So we want to say thank you first off to anyone watching, anyone who's supported the channel. We greatly appreciate it. It's kind of surreal that we even reached this milestone, especially when we did. So as a bit of a thank you, we want to do a bit of a giveaway. So we're going to have a contest associated with this video. All you're going to have to do to enter is leave a comment below on YouTube stating whether you're either on Team Agricola or Team Feast. So at the end of the video, tell us which game you prefer more, leave a comment, and basically just keep checking back in the comments by March 7th, November.
8 months down the road.
By Monday, March 7th.
What year is it?
We will be replying to the comment. We'll randomly pick someone who has left a comment, and you'll be selected, and basically we're going to hook that person up with a copy of either game Agricola or A Feast for Odin, or if you already own both, you can pick a different Uwe Rosenberg game, and we'll make it happen. So check back on your YouTube notifications if you leave a comment, as we will select a winner by March 7th.
Yep. Sounds great.
Otherwise, we're going to get right into it. We're going to just do a little bit of kind of an intro as to our history and experience with these games, just so you know why these are so important to us, kind of how many times we've played them and that sort of thing. Then we'll give you a brief kind of overview of how each of the games play in case you're not familiar with them. And then we're going to go through a bunch of different categories and kind of compare the games and basically, debate and fight each other over them.
Yep.
So yeah, do you want to take it away, Dylan? Tell us a little bit
Sure.
first about your experience with both these games.
Yeah, with both these games. Okay, fine.
Yeah, just so people know,
sure. You know what? I'm going to actually start with Agricola because that's actually the one I played first.
Okay.
So Agricola, I'm going to put this down so we have a little bit more room here. So Agricola was one of the first board games that Carlo actually introduced to me. Given the fact that Carlo's played this game, maybe it wasn't 100 at that point, but it was definitely over 70 at that point probably. That you had played it. Carlo thoroughly destroyed me, and I even though I appreciated certain elements of it and really enjoyed seeing that a board game could go that far into those lengths, I also just was overwhelmed by the game. I think after that, it took a while, and then I eventually got Pandemic and got into it, but we took a while before we actually went back to Agricola. So I think it sort of opened the door to the possibility of board games for me, but it took me a long time to really come back to it. But it was something that I was kind of left in the back of my mind and remembered about when it came time to get A Feast for Odin, because I wanted my own big box experience, and it was one that I think the theme just spoke to me. I'm going to push this out of the way. We're just going to keep it out of the way.
Wow.
Feast for
No
Odin.
respect.
So I got A Feast for Odin within the first year, just maybe after a year of getting into board games a little bit more, and starting my own shelf and my own collection. I had thought about buying it multiple times, and then I was at a local place here, and they had it in stock on the shelf, and it was only $5 more than the online price, which is something that usually doesn't happen. Still very expensive. It was $100 Canadian game, but I just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna get it. I took the plunge. I think I just messaged you being well, I just bought A Feast for Odin, and we were both pretty pumped because we both had wanted to play it.
Yeah.
And I knew I was gonna like it. I did not know at the time it was gonna become one of my favorite games of all time, if not my favorite. And the fact that it would eventually spark this rivalry.
Yeah.
So I started playing it right away. I would set it up sometimes even if I wasn't gonna play it, just to make sure I could understand it for when it came time to do a 3-player game, because I just wanted to handle the components. And I remember all the punch boards, all the stuff that was in there, unpacking it all was just the biggest joy. So yeah, I dove in and I played it I think I'm close. I think I'm over 15 times now, close but not quite 20. But over the course of a long period of time, that sometimes there'd be gaps without me playing it, and now that's also been aided by the ability to play it on TTS and things like that. I think we played it. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and that's my history with both.
Cool. All right, and as for me with Agricola, it was one of the first games I ever bought. This came out in 2007. I think I got it in 2009 or 2010 or something like that. At the time, I think I only had 3-4 games in my collection. I'd started with games like Carcassonne and Ticket to Ride. This was quite the step up, and I learned it with a couple of friends who we all kind of like fell in love with the game immediately, and this kind of became our like go-to game. Like we would get together and play like for the foreseeable future after that point. The next 2-3 years, it was like almost always we would just get together and play Agricola. And that's how I managed to log, I have now over 130 plays of this just with the physical copy alone. Now it's on Board Game Arena as well. So this is one of my most played games of all time, and especially in terms of the total number of hours. Like most other games I've played this much are much shorter games. So this is just a game that has been like a huge part of my total sort of like experience as a board gamer. And of course I've played Feast for Odin quite a bit with you since it's come out as well, but I've only played Feast for Odin maybe about 10 times or so, so it kind of pales in comparison to this in terms of my experience with the game.
It shines in comparison, doesn't it?
No, I just meant the trash talking will happen as it comes, but just in a respectful way. All I'm saying is that I definitely don't have as much experience with it anywhere near as I do with Agricola. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's worth noting right now real quick that A Feast for Odin came out about a decade later. This was 2016. Now, shall we just give a quick kind of rules overview of how these games work?
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
Should we maybe start with Agricola since it's the older game?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Agricola is a worker placement game that plays over 14 rounds. The basic idea is you have your own little player area in front of you that represents your farm, and you have 2 family members who represent your workers, and every round you're going to take each of your family members and put them on an action space on the board that allows you to take an action, whether it's collecting goods, building rooms onto your house, playing cards from your hand, etc. And throughout the game, there's going to be these harvests that are spread out where you're going to be able to take crops off of the fields that you've sown. You're going to have to feed your family a certain number of food per family member, and your animals are going to breed and so on. And the idea is you just try and develop your little farmland based on the starting card of occupation cards and minor improvement cards that you have, and sort of manage your resources and the economy of your farm as you grow your family. The more family members you get, the more food you have to feed them. So it's a very tight, unforgiving, very punishing game, something that's has a very steep learning curve, at least when getting into it at first. Even though the rules might not be super complex, it's just a game that's very tough to do well at your first kind of few times playing. But that's pretty much it for how it plays, I think.
Yep. And Feast for Odin is a worker placement game with a ton of worker placement spots. There's multiple phases in the game, but some of them are so quick that even when you play it on BGA, I think they automate them all in a matter of seconds sometimes. Generally, what you're going to be spending most of the game doing is taking your workers and placing them on different columns. One column will be you just have to place 1 worker to take the actions, whereas the last column you have to place all 4, and there's everything in between. And you're basically going to be doing a whole bunch of different stuff. You're going to be hunting, you're going to be pillaging, you're going to be raiding, you're going to be collecting goods, going to the market, you're going to be taking stuff from different mountain tiles, different resources, and everything you're doing is to gather tiles of specific colors and upgrade them to the colors that are allowed to go onto your player board to cover negative point spots in a polyomino style game. You're also able to add new islands to these sort of like, it's around your board as secondary boards that you can place these polyomino tiles onto to cover those spaces and gain extra income. There's other additional boards you can buy. You're buying ships to emigrate and to be able to take some of these actions. So really it's a sandbox game in a lot of ways where you can do a whole bunch of different stuff. You're definitely never going to do it all. You can breed animals if you want, but based on the cards that you get and the way the game is flowing, you're going to choose a different strategy every time on what's going to lead you to victory in a whole bunch of different scoring categories.
Yep.
That's it.
All right. So now is sort of where the gloves come off. Here's where we're going to go through a bunch of different categories and kind of compare the games. And before we get too into this, I will just say, like, full disclosure, we are obviously each pretty passionate about the game we're kind of representing here, but we also each do quite enjoy playing the other games, and I think we both have a lot of respect for the other games. So a lot of this is going to come across as like we're each looking to kind of, criticize the other person's game as much as possible, but just know, like, we I can't speak for you. I love A Feast for Odin, and so, yeah. But either way, let's get into it. The first category we're going to talk about is kind of just the first thing you see, which is like price, box size, that kind of thing. It is worth noting, we're talking Canadian dollars here. Agricola is about a $60-ish game. I think I bought it for about 70 Canadian. These days, the revised edition is about $60. Feast Road was what, like 90, 100 kind of
Yeah, it was
range?
about 100, and we know, like,
Okay.
obviously everything that's been costs more money is better. That's just the way the world
Well, I was
works.
gonna say almost double the price. I think even though you like it
Almost
more,
double the
you
price,
wouldn't say
okay.
it's twice as good of a
It's
game.
not
though,
almost
would
double
you?
the price. It's $60 to like $90. It's like $30 more.
Well,
It's-
would you say that the increase in price is justified by the
Yeah, for
increase?
sure. Look
Oh,
at look
okay.
at how much bigger the box is too, right? Like it has more good stuff in it. It has more entertainment and it has
The
more
big
fun.
box size is a negative, though. It takes up more
Let-
room. You have
let-
room
let
for
me
fewer
just-
games on your shelf.
Let me just put it this way: if you could spend $60 for an okay time or $90 for an amazing
Wow.
time, which one would you spend? I'm willing to spend $30 to go from just a good day to a great day.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Underplaying how good Agricola is. It just an okay
No,
time.
it's a good title. But if you want a great title, you just take out an extra $30.
Okay.
Like if I go to the store, if I go to the store and I have $10, or I say I have $10 in my pocket to spend on snacks, and I can go and I can spend all $10 on like some great peanut butter and chocolate bar or something like that, or I could spend $1 on some 5-cent candies. Like I'm probably gonna go with what's gonna taste really really good.
Wow. Easy now. I see.
First category, I already have to bleep out swears in this video.
I think that more like when you get a bag of chips and like half of it is just air and you're like, oh, what a ripoff. Why is there so much wasted space? It's like, why couldn't you just fit the same game in a box half the size?
This
Why are we-
box, I'll have you know, is full to the brim. There's no wasted space in here.
Okay. I think we've talked before
yeah.
too. Neither game has a proper insert. These are both the kind of old school Euro games where it's just a bunch of Ziploc bags just tossed around everywhere. So realistically, I think we would argue about this for days. I don't think there's a clear winner in either of these.
No, and both games are losers in terms of not having an insert. I think both games should need to have a really good insert.
I actually like the whole Ziploc bag thing.
just-
That's another video for another day.
You just
though.
like a mess of bags. All right.
All right, now second category we're going to get into is the rules, setup time, and sort of complexity of the game. So do you want to kick it off with a Feast Rodin?
Sure. I will be the first to admit that this is a game you want to have already set up before people come over because it takes a long time to set up. That's one of the joys of BGA and TTS is the fact you don't have to set it up. That being said, when you walk into a room where Feast Rodin is set up on the table, I am a firm believer that looks way more exciting than a table that has Agricola set up on the table. Because in Feast, you have this board with this oval board with all these treasures that you're going to get. You have these 2 plastic trays full of all different colors of inserts or resources that you're gonna access. Everyone has their own individual player board. You got the action board in the middle. Everything's popping with all these Viking themes and everything. So when you see it all set up, even though it takes forever to set it all up, I think the table presence of Feast Rodin is going to be something.
Whoa,
that makes
table
people go,
presence is a future category.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's in the setup. I guess. Okay, fine. We'll come back to it. It's fine.
We're just talking about how
Yes.
easy or tough the game is to get into. This
Whoa,
guy's
whoa,
already
whoa,
like,
whoa, whoa.
let's talk about the best things about a Feast Rodin. No, easy now.
Okay. Complexity-wise, I think Feast Rodin is for sure a more complex game, but it's interesting because it's not. I wouldn't say it's more complex in the rules. It's more complex in the actions, and I know that could be viewed as the same thing. But I've always said it to someone like, to say to someone, the rules are on your turn you put a worker down or you put 4 workers down is quick to teach. It's the fact that you have to teach them every single action on the board.
Yeah.
So that's where the complexity is coming out of learning everything you can do. Whereas I think in Agricola, even though that's the case as well, there's more complexity coming out in the rules and the cards and seeing how it all gets influenced. Where that's kind of not as complex in
Yes,
Feast Rodin.
and I think one thing is Feast Rodin is not as complex as it looks because even though there's, I don't remember how many it is, like 50 or 60 action spaces, like a lot of the spaces have icons that you see on other spaces, so it's not like you have to explain what 50 or 60 different things do. There's just, they're spread out differently. There's things that reappear in different spots. So I think like you've said before, it's just like, it's about knowing what the action spaces do. The rules themselves aren't that complex. I would say maybe the actual rules are shorter, like the rule book for Agricola is probably shorter than a Feast for Odin, but I'll even say like Agricola is the more unforgiving game for a newer player because Agricola is one of the games where you can look back and realize that one specific move you made early on completely changed the game for you and made it really tough to win. Like, it's really tough to recover from your mistakes in Agricola, whereas in a Feast Rodin, I think there's more room to kind of like make up for a mistake or get something later, right? Whereas like the timing of things in Agricola makes it that even that very first play, even if you understand the rules, it can still be a very tough first play.
This is like the political answer to finding a kind way of saying that Agricola is gonna just beat you down, and Feast Rodin is gonna be way more forgiving. You're like, I think that
Feast
Agricola
Rodin's coddle you a little bit more than you want to be coddled.
Agricola's probably the more punishing game. Like, if I had to really answer this question, it's absolutely the more punishing game.
Oh, I wasn't trying to make it.
No, it is so punishing that
for sure.
Many people are going to play Agricola and be like, I don't want to be punished because playing a board game. Whereas Feast is going to be like a nice warm hug that's just bringing you in, and they never want to be let go ever.
Oh.
So.
Wow.
All right,
move on to the same thing. Yeah, next category. Art and table presents. All right, well, you clearly already spoke about table presents, so with a Feast for Odin. So now let's talk about Agricola for a second. I will say this is a category where I can fully say that for the most part, I think A Feast for Odin is mostly the better looking game. We have to keep in mind that it came out 10 years later, 2016 compared to 2007. So just in general, games from the time that Agricola came out don't tend to look quite as nice. Obviously, just like the player boards and the things that you're building and all the different colors on the tiles is all really, really nice. I think there's one main area where I give the nod to Agricola in terms of like the actual look of the game, and it's the cards. So the occupation cards and the minor improvement cards, I do prefer the artwork on them. Like the occupations actually have like a person and it's like a fancy outfit. They might be wearing a hat or something.
There's no artwork on the Feast ones, I don't
think. Or they'll just be like, even if it says an occupation, like the cabinet maker or the whatever, like it's just usually like an object. It's not like a person. So it's worth noting that the artists are different. Clemens Franz did the art for Agricola. Dennis Lohausen did the art for Feast for Odin. They're both legends. And so even though I think Agricola is a better game and I prefer it, if I'm saying ultimately I do think the art and table presence is a little more eye-catching in A Feast for Odin.
A little. I'm glad you conceded this category because let's just one at a time look at this. You get this nice cover with this like, you know, Viking container of mead that's being raised, and like you got the sky with the crows over here going through. You have all these Vikings about to like engage in a meal and do all this hunting and everything, and then you pull over Agricola here, and you've got a lady with a bowl of stew and a sheep and two guys peeking out the entranceway of a door. There's only one game here that's more inviting, and that is clearly, not a little bit, clearly A Feast for Odin.
But as we all know, there's sort of this common thing in games where usually it's like the uglier the game, the better. True. You know, all kinds of classic games of Kalis and Hansa Teutonica with just the angry, disappointed-looking person on the cover of a kind of beige-ish brown box. But I think for the most part we both agree that A Feast for Odin is probably the more appealing game, the nicer-looking game overall.
Yep.
But yeah. All right, next category here is worker placement.
Oh yeah.
So. This is where, in my opinion, I think it's one of the areas where like I feel very strongly that Agricola does worker placement better than A Feast for Odin. And that's because I really like all of my favorite worker placement games are ones where there's a lot of heavy competition for the spots. There's a lot of spots that you go to where that's the only place on the board that you can get that. I've mentioned this when we talk about Newsfjord as well. I love how it's like you're often taking actions that you might really need something on the board, but you see something piling up on the board. And one thing I really like in Agricola that A Feast for Odin doesn't have is the increasing resource spaces, right? From the one round to the next. Like if there's 3 wood left there at the start of the next round, you're going to be adding more wood and more reeds. So sometimes you look at a spot and think, I don't really need that, but I can't possibly let my opponent take that 6 wood. Or if I don't take that 3 wood now, next round someone's going to grab that 6 wood, so I guess I'll take this because I can't let my opponent have it. So it's that decision of, am I taking something that helps me or that hurts my opponent more? I really like that. It just feels a lot more competitive and cutthroat, and I feel like it's something that like these older kind of games had that more. Keyflower had it a lot too with the worker placement. We've seen as time goes on, games with worker placement tend to be a little more open and a little more friendly, and like A Feast for Odin, Champions of Midgard, Everdell, whatever. Yeah. A lot of these newer games have it a bit more open with the worker placement, and that's somewhere where, personally, I think Agricola does it much better, and that's, like, in my opinion, I think that's the whole reason to have worker placement in a game is so that you're competing over things that you, like, to make those decisions really difficult as to where you can and can't go. And there is a bit of the blocking and stuff in A Feast for Odin I know you're going to talk about, and obviously, if we had played the expansion...
I know you're going to say that you're already preemptively like saying what I'm going to say. So
no. What I was going to say was just the expansion with the... I know the Norwegians apparently makes it more interactive and cutthroat. So, but we are just talking about just base games here. But yeah, what do you think about them?
Yeah, I
in
won't.
terms of worker
And this is
placement?
one category I'm not going to say anything negative about Agricola. I'm just going to talk about Feast because I think they both do worker placement differently. That I don't think either one is necessarily wrong, but I think they're both for very different styles of gamers.
One's just slightly more right than the other.
Yeah, right. Agricola's is much tighter in the same way like you did compared to New Fjord and things like that. And it is much more about, if you could take a spot that could really hinder everything I'm doing, and it might be like I have to find a way to decide, do I want to become first player on the next round because it's going to really matter who grabs this spot, things like that. Whereas Feast, it's very much, there's still competition for spots. We just played and there was tons of times where the spot I wanted to take was taken by someone else, but you'll have it where there's often multiple ways to accomplish something, or there's another path you can take. If someone blocks you there, you say, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to pivot and do this instead. The reason I prefer this type of worker placement, and at least in this situation, is that the competition for the spots is still there. It's subdued, but because you're choosing between doing 4, 3, 2, or 1 workers, you're almost competing with your own resources, saying, I could do this and get a whole bunch of benefits, but that means I'm only going to have potentially 3 actions I take this game instead of potentially 5 or 6 or 7 actions. And so you're not only competing with the other person, you're competing with yourself and how much you need to be able to accomplish and what order you're going to do it in. And I like the idea of having to strategically think, I was planning on going pillaging, but before the actions got back to me, pillaging was taken. The reason I wanted to go pillaging was I need to get this tile to do this. How else can I accomplish that? And now you're starting to look at the action spots and say, if I do this, I could do this, and I could do that. That will pull it off. So you can pivot, and that figuring that out is a really fun puzzle for me. And so I really prefer that in worker placement, where I don't feel locked out by, Carlo took the read, and now I'm in a real big jam where I gotta hope I get it next time, or it builds up differently. I feel like I don't like to be punished as much as Agricola punishes me. That being said, when we played it at 3, it didn't feel quite as punishing as when we played it at 2 for some reason. I don't know whether that's universally accepted. I felt like I had more opportunities at 3, even with more people competing for spaces. It just felt like I don't know what it was, but the time I played it with 3 I felt way, and maybe it was because I had already played it with 2 a couple times. I was familiar with the rules, but whatever it was, that time we played it, I felt I got the least punished, even though I didn't win the game. So it might just be a case of me not having played it enough as well. Right. But I think, it's two very distinct type of worker placements. They're actually, even though they're both worker placement games, they're very different in how they approach it. Yeah.
Because I think there's certain things that I think we would both agree that Agricola has more of the timing specific stuff where, like, if you don't, build enough rooms quickly enough to have room for your family, and you don't grow your family early enough, then as that tight squeeze happens and those rounds get closer, the harvests get closer together, if you don't have more family members to take actions in the round, you're going to have, you have less time each harvest to get more food for your family. So there's these kind of like this squeeze that happens near the midway point of the game where timing is really important. Whereas a Feast Rodent does have some of those timing things, like with the ships immigrating, obviously. Like the earlier you immigrate them, the less it costs you. Long term, you're spending less food to feed your family. So that's, I just wish a Feast Rodent had more of those timing things that made me feel like I could leave that for later, but if I don't get it now, it's really going to hurt me, rather than if I want to go there, I can just play that card later or do that other thing later. The other thing I'll mention about the worker placement real quick is how you get additional workers. So in Agricola, you have to basically, again, make room for them, and you actually go take an action to grow your family. So it's an active choice to make when you want to go get those extra workers that are going to require extra food.
And what's it called when you get a new family member?
Wishing for Children.
Wow.
Well, at least it's weird because
Wishing
the
for
original,
Children.
my copy of the game just says Family Growth, but the revised one says Wishing for Children.
Wow.
As if they changed to say, well, there's no guarantees. You'll see what happens.
See, well, thematically, then sometimes when you go to Wishing for Children, you should be like, you didn't get a worker this time.
Maybe. That's a question for Uwe or the publisher. And then the Feast for Odin, everyone is getting a worker at the in the sort of upkeep during the rounds or whatever. So everyone's gaining workers at the same rate. And that's another thing that I personally prefer about Agricola, is the choice with the added risk of, am I going to be able to feed these extra family members? And when do I get them, kind of thing?
Yep. I don't prefer it, but that's okay.
Oh, okay.
You're wrong, but it's okay.
All right. Next up, we are going to talk about the cards. This is a huge category because the cards are used fairly differently in the games, and I think they're much more impactful in Agricola, which I don't think you could disagree with that one.
No, and it's funny because I like the cards a lot in Feast, to the point where I don't think I like either one more than the other. I like Agricola's cards for one reason, I like Feast's cards for one reason, but the way that you acquire Feast's cards is so restrictive that you don't actually acquire that many cards in a game, or if you do, you're sacrificing other things you're doing. And so there's a large deck of cards, and it says you can even mix all the decks together. And there's so many cards I haven't seen and probably will never see because I get so few of them. Whereas in Agricola, there is a lot of cards, but I felt like I see more and I end up with a whole bunch to start the game. So I'm able to sort of just like make a plan right from the start and see how they're going to impact that game. Where Feast, sometimes I'll draw a card and be like, oh, like it's too late. Like if I would have got this 3 rounds ago, this would have helped, but it's too late now. So I wish that there was a way that you were getting more cards in a Feast for Odin, or you started the game with more cards so that they could impact your game earlier on. That's the one thing. Yeah,
because in a Feast for Odin, we didn't mention, you only start with one single card in your hand at the start of the game in a Feast for Odin. You have a starting occupation, and that's it.
Yep.
And in Agricola, you start with 7 occupations and 7 minor improvements.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes do a draft in Agricola too, where you draft the cards in advance. So Agricola has that thing where you have a hand of 14 cards at the start, and you can make a strategy saying, okay, this is going to be the first card I play. I can maybe play these later in the game, and you have these, but there's no way to gain more cards throughout the game. Like, you're given those, you're not getting any more, whereas a Feast for Odin, you can gain more throughout the game. And that was one of the things I didn't like as much, was drawing a card that you see either is going to do nothing for you, or you're like, it gives you a point at the end of the game, but you're not going to take advantage of the ability. So it's kind of that, like, if I'm playing a longer strategy game, it's a similar issue I had with Terraforming Mars, where you're like 2/3 of the way into the game, and then you're drawing cards that you can't even play anymore that are going to do nothing for you. It feels like, well, if I was going to have these cards, it would have been nice to know that from the start and plan around them, rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to spend time going to draw a card, and then, oh, this does nothing for me.
Yeah. Feast
glad you agree.
Feast is missing something to do with the cards that can't do anything for you. I mean, they give you points, but it's just not as exciting. But I will say that when you do get the cards early, they do impact the game, and they are really, really fun in Feast. Like I said, they're really restrictive in how often you acquire them.
Yeah, and I think even just in terms of the amount of points they can get you, or how much they drive your strategy, like, to me, the cards feel more... like the cards in Agricola feel like they drive your strategy and your direction in the game a little more, whereas in a Feast for Odin, sometimes you can say, I don't really want to do what this card says, so I'll just like keep doing what I'm doing here. I don't have to play these cards or whatever.
Exactly.
But all right, next category up now is player boards and personal areas. So basically, a good chunk of what happens in these games is the worker placement spots you're competing, but when you go to those spots, it's usually to then do something on your personal board. So in Agricola, as I mentioned before, you have a little, basically your farm. It has 15 open spaces. You start with 2 spaces covered up with your size 2 wooden house, basically, and you can cover spots with, fields to sow your grains and veggies, and you can build pastures to hold your animals and that kind of thing. So it is definitely a smaller portion of what you're doing. It's a smaller board, and there's not as much going on in there as a Feast for Odin. Whereas a Feast for Odin, obviously, you have like your own giant board with things that you can surround. -1 spaces.
The world is full of possibilities in Feast for Odin. The toy that the babies use, or young kids use, where you have like a bucket with the lid that has different shaped size holes, and you have to put like the square into the square hole. Agricola is like if every single hole in the bucket was a square, and then Feast for Odin is like just a myriad of shapes and everything, because you have this polyomino section that you have to fit in a certain way. You can put the polyominoes anywhere you want, but a certain way you have to put them in is how you get your income up. Agricola, everything's just the same dimensions, and you're either putting tiles down, or you're putting the little fences down, or like you're putting things on them, but everything is just the exact same dimension. So it's very much just like every single shape goes into the same thing. This is just, you can go anywhere you want. You can take like this resource and convert it into this color and put it over in this quadrant to cover these minuses. You can put it over here to cover some income spots to give yourself more silver on the next round. So I feel like there's a much more intrigue going on in your personal player board that other people are going to be sort of interested in. Even when you're playing on BG, I'm constantly looking at everyone else to see what their income is, where I feel like in Agricola, I can just sort of glance over and see what's going on by how many fences they have or by how many houses they've constructed without me having to really analyze the board. So.
Right. No, that's fair. I will totally agree that Feast for Odin generally has the more interesting decisions in terms of how you're building up your player board, where you're putting things, because of the way those little coins go across and diagonal for the income. The one complaint I would say I have about it is that it can be a little fiddly sometimes and can lead to some downtime when you're trying to like fit things in, and then you're one spot off of getting your income, and you don't want to just like... If you have things in a way where you're covering up an income spot that you're not supposed to, because you go in that line from the coin you're supposed to cover up. I'm doing a bad job explaining this right now, but I don't want to go any more into it. but basically it can slow down the game a bit trying to fit where everything is. So, but like it does make for more interesting decisions. There's more opportunities, there's more options, there's more variety from one player's board to the next, from one game to the next. Like your board will look very different one game to the next compared to Agricola. There is more similarity from one game to another. So I would probably give the nod in that case to A Feast for Odin. Even though there's things I don't like about it, but we're gonna save that more for the theme section, or some other section.
I have a couple things about the theme section too, and it's next. So let's
Okay,
just do it. Let's jump
let's
into
go.
the theme.
Oh wait, well I was just gonna say that it's worth noting in this player board section that A Feast for Odin is the only one with polyominoes. Obviously, there's no polyomino tiles in Agricola, but all right, let's get right into theme.
All right.
Let me hear it.
So, I mean, I don't even have to get into the whole Viking versus farm thing. I mean, like, from an interesting, exciting level, I would say it's hard to argue that Feast for Odin's theme is more exciting than Agricola's. I'm not talking about the implementation of how well they represent it, but, like, the idea of being able to raid and pillage and go across the different islands and bring them over and to build a storehouse or to raise animals, everything. I mean, like, that is way more exciting than just I just farm and get crops and get animals. Like I think that there's no question there. That's not talking about the integration of the themes. But I will say the one thing, because I know you're going to bring up, I'll let you bring it up though, is the fact that both games involve having to feed your Vikings or feed your family. Mm-hmm. I won't bring up your point, but I will say that I'm actually not a fan of that in most games. Like even in games like Zolkin that have and stuff, I always find that to be something that's more causes too much anxiety in me to be like, I want to do all this stuff, but I also have to just feed my workers. And I always find that to be really frustrating. But in Feast, it doesn't bother me so much because they've included it as sort of like a polyomino mini, like not polyomino, but like a mini row where you have to take these tiles and fit them in a certain way with certain restrictions in the way that you place them, in the orientation you place them. And I find that more interesting than just saying, you owe this much food, for instance, right? So even though it's still not my favorite mechanic in Feast for Odin or any game, I do like the way the Feast implements it because I just find it's a more interesting way, and you can reduce the amount you have to feed by emigrating ships too. So I do like the way that they've implemented that specific thing in Feast for Odin more than Agricola.
Fair enough.
I'll let you speak to theme.
Well, what I was going to say was, like, if we're just talking, like, forget the games for a second, what is more interesting, farming or Vikings? Absolutely Vikings. But I don't feel like a Viking in any way while playing the game. Like, it feels like it's kind of a pasted on theme. Well, I mean, when you go to like for example, exploring a new island, it's like, okay, you take a board and now you're going to be putting weird shaped pieces. Like, what does laying pieces on your thing represent? Like, you have a land and you're just like laying clothing and laying animal skins on the ground.
What does putting sticks on your board represent?
It's fenced. They're pastures to keep your
animals in. It's just a stick. You put I understand what you're saying.
When you see your animals inside a little like rectangle, you can say like, oh, they're clearly in an enclosure. And Feast for Odin, you're like, why are those things lying on the ground? And why are
when you see on your tile that it's a big treasure chest or that it's a bunch of silver, it's because you pillaged that. You went and you as a Viking and you had to go and fight and raid and everything to get these spoils of war and bring them back.
Right, but then you're just leaving them in a patch of grass somewhere, right? It's just like this green open board. Like
no.
I put this here, and for some reason, if I lay down this jacket here, I'll get more income. But if I put the jacket over there, it's not going to get me more.
You go to this Vikings camp, and they just have like all their spoils like in the grass in a polyomino shape.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Like, what's the like? And there's spaces that don't have -1s, but there's spaces that do. Like thematically, what do the -1s represent, and why is it that if I put something here, I cover up negative points, but if I put it here, I don't. There's no negative points to cover up.
These are just the questions you don't need to be asking. Like these are questions that just don't have.
I wouldn't need to if the theme made more sense, but because it doesn't, I do need to ask these questions.
Maybe the theme integration of Agricola is better, but then that gets into the debate of does integrating a theme better make the game better if it's not as fun, or does integrating it not as well but with a better, more interesting theme? Is that okay? You know, it comes down to how well do you need the theme integrator, or how much does it matter to you if the theme is just way more exciting?
Right, and in that case, I would just say pick a different theme that fits better, rather than shoehorning in Vikings just to say, hey, look, it's a Viking game instead of the same old farming.
I think it's very hard for almost any polyomino-based game to find a way to properly integrate the theme. I think the only one that does it is like Patchwork. Yeah. But like other than that, like anything is going to be a stretch for polyominoes, no matter what. So I don't ask too many questions about the polyomino things. I just ask questions about like what I'm doing on an action space, whether it thematically makes sense for the Viking theme, and in that case, I can pretty much make the case that everyone does.
Fair enough. I like in games when, even if it's not fully tied in, if when I do something, I can think, Why would that? Oh, right, that makes sense because thematically this is what's going on there. Whereas again, like the -1 spaces don't make any sense to me. And the other thing, which you know this is coming, is so in both games you have to feed your people food. And in Agricola, the only option is food. There's other things you can use for food, but you have to like cook your animals to then feed that food, or bake your grain to then give your people that food. In a Feast for Odin, you have these tokens that represent your food, but for some reason you can also just feed your people silver. And I know Dylan has tried saying before that, well, no, they're taking the silver and going to the market. But the way the round works is you go and it says that your workers are seated at the banquet table. So it's like, hey, let's go sit down at the banquet table, and then you put your silver there. So they sit down at the table, and everyone beside them is eating, and they just have a piece of silver in front of them. Now, if they're getting it from the market, then there should be an action space where you go convert silver to food. But if you get to the banquet table, we're all going to sit down for a feast, and there's silver in front of me, there's no way around it. You're serving your Viking silver, and they're going to eat it happily.
You're giving the patrons silver to not eat, to go buy their own food.
So we say, okay, we're going to enjoy while we're eating. You go to the market.
Yeah.
We're just going to finish our meal. You guys go get your food from the market.
Some people in the community go and hunt their own food. Everyone else, like us, when we don't go hunt deer to go cook. We go to the grocery store and we buy food. Some Vikings are given money to go buy their food, and other people hunt it themselves and go gather their own food. So,
but who put the silver at the table?
The community.
Vikings. But why didn't those people go to the market and get the food themselves? Why does the Viking who's sitting there to eat have to go to the market themselves?
We want to support our community, but we don't expect everyone to have the skills and the aptitude to be able to hunt. So we say, for those who are unable to or unwilling, here's a silver, go to the market, buy yourself some food, and you can join the banquet that way. Thematically, that's what makes sense.
Weird that it wasn't written that way in the rule book. It just said that you sit at the banquet table
probably because he thought,
silver.
I don't have to explain this to anyone. This will be just self-explanatory. No one's going to sit down and make an argument about whether they're consuming silver. And I'll have you know that I looked it up, and consuming silver doesn't kill you or anything. It just makes your skin
It's part of a healthy diet.
It makes your skin really blue. So like really, it would just make the Vikings look way more badass. I'm not advocating right now for you to go and eat silver or anything. But I'm just saying it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if people ate silver. Just saying.
Next time you come over and we're having dinner together, there's just gonna be silver, and you can go to the market and buy yourself some
I'm gonna eat it happily.
Thematically, is there anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Like, I think the themes are self-explanatory based on, like, just even the covers and everything. Like, again, I've said my point on it. Like, I think it's a more exciting theme, and I can get over the hurdles of, like, certain integrations of that theme not being, like, 100% accurate or, believable, because the theme I just enjoy, and I like the way that they've given me so many actions like a Viking would have to choose to do all these different things.
Right, and I will say, like, of the two of I'm always the one who's nitpicking the theme. Anytime we play a game, I'm always like, that doesn't make sense. From a thematic standpoint, what are we doing here? And Dylan's always being like, oh, come on, just let's move on and carry on with the game. But for some reason that bothers me. So there's something satisfying to me about seeing my farm come together in Agricola and thinking, that just makes sense to me. And when I play a Feast for Odin, I don't feel like a Viking. Even though it does have the more appealing artwork and the theme is exciting, it feels like it doesn't quite live up to it.
Fair enough.
All right, next we are getting into scoring.
Okay.
So these games have, I would say, fairly different scoring because Agricola has their few categories. Like, first off, the scores are probably similar-ish, kind of like mid-50s to up to 80, kind of whatever. I guess maybe it can range. But in Agricola, a big chunk of your points are coming from your rooms in your house. So every room that you have in your, let's say, stone house is worth, I think it's 2 points per room in a stone house, or if you have a clay or wooden house, it's worth less. And every family member is worth 3 points. So sometimes if you have the max 5 family members for 15 points there, and let's say you have a stone house with 5 rooms, that's another, like, that could be 25 points. That might be half or more than half your score just from your house and your people. And then there's basically a bunch of categories for your different animals, the sheep, boar, and cattle, grain and vegetables. Any of those categories that you have 0 of at the end of the game, you get -1 point. And then there's different amounts where if you get a certain number of these, you get 1, 2, 3, up to a maximum of 4 points across all those categories. So the scoring is less varied in that way. The only true variation, aside from, like, again, how many of these things you have across those categories, is the cards. So some of the cards, whether you're buying major improvements that have victory points printed on them, or a bonus symbol, it'll say, like, at the end of the game, you get this many points for every, room that you have in your clay house, or you get this many bonus points for how many occupations you played or whatever. So the points, I think, from game to game are a little more similar in Agricola, and a lot of the time there's certain things where you know you're going to have to get a certain number of points in certain categories every time.
Yeah, and Feast for Odin, I mean, the one consistent thing for points is obviously clearing the negative ones off your board. I think you start with minus 48 points or something in this game.
It's 80 something.
Yeah, right. It's just it's
minus
ridiculous.
86 or something.
So obviously that's a big thing of what you're doing. But beyond that, yeah, like the scores and how you score and where you're scoring from is different every game. I used to rag on Carlo the first time, a few times we played, because he would constantly get most of his points from getting other boards that you have to add polyomino pieces to get more negative ones covered. As one of his strategies, we had the scoring sheets, and he was consistently doing that. I think every time I played Feast for Odin, just out of curiosity, I've done something a little bit different. Like one time we played, I specifically said, this game, regardless of what cards I get, I'm going to go heavy into animal breeding and just see what I can accomplish. And I think at the end of the game, I got like 40 points from like animal breeding alone, but I neglected a bunch of other categories. But it was viable, and maybe it's not viable if you're playing something, like I said, at a competitive level, because someone's figured out what are the best paths. But when you're playing just with your friends and stuff, I would say there's a lot of paths you can take to get points beyond the player boards. The player boards are people are going to do well on some level, but even when we played most recently with Braden, like I purposely went in there and I said, I'm going to try to not focus on my player board that much, because I was curious whether I would still get a score that was like competitive with you guys. And I lost. I came in third place, but I think in that last turn of the game, I went from like 20 points to 64 or something like that, this huge jump, because I only covered stuff on my player board on the last turn of the game. Right. And I think I only lost, I was out of second place by 10 points. So even in that case, neglecting my player board and focusing on like immigrating ships really early in the game when they were cheap and doing other things, it's still was a competitive score. So I like that even though there's so many different categories, you definitely don't have to focus on each one, and you can decide this game which one am I going to make my main category, and then I'll sort of sprinkle the rest of my points throughout the other ones. So
right.
Yeah.
And I have to say that Agricola, you do have to kind of be at the mercy of what you have in your hand a little more. So like if you just look at your open 14 cards in Agricola and you say like, whatever, I don't really want to do this strategy that these cards go for, and you just try and like take actions on the board and not pay attention to your cards, like you're probably going to lose if there are players at the table who do that part of the game well, like going towards their cards. So in a way, you do have a lot more control over where you want to try and score points and what you want to do in a Feast for Odin, because of the fact that you're not like, I have to follow what these cards do, otherwise I'm not going to get any advantages. So I do like that aspect of like, you can just say, even before the game is set up, you say, this game I want to try this, and you can, and it can be viable. Whereas in Agricola, I can't just say, I'm going to try baking a bunch of grain, because if all my cards have to do with like getting animals and doing other stuff, it doesn't make any sense at all to do that. So there's definitely a lot more freedom to go the path you want, and I think the scoring categories overall, I would say, are more interesting and more varied in a Feast for Odin. It pains me to say that, but just being honest.
Yeah.
Even it's just especially like the whole thing with the ships and buying ships and immigrating them early, and that's a really interesting thing that I really enjoy about a Feast for Odin.
Yeah.
Okay, now next category is player count and scaling. So I should mention real quick, the version of Agricola that I have says 1 to 5 players. Since the revised edition that they released, I believe in 2016 or whatever, only goes up to 4 players. I've only played the game once or twice with 5 players. Most, I would say about half my plays at least, have been with 2 players, a good chunk with 3, and I've only played it with 4, maybe like 5 or 10 times. Feast for Odin has been mostly 2 or 3 players, I think, for both of us, right?
I played with 3 the most, I think, and then 2 like right behind. 4 I've only done once or twice. Right. My favorite player count by far is 3. I like it at 2 a lot, but I think with 3 it's the right amount of competition for the action spaces. When you go to 4, you have more people competing, but they now add 2 new action spaces onto the board that say you can now copy whatever the last action that was taken was, or something like that. So you almost lose some competition. 3 is the exact right balance with this current board. This obviously is the base game. I think obviously Norwegians does better scaling with all these player counts because they add a whole new action board in. But just with the base game, 3 is by far the player count I enjoy the most. It doesn't add too much to the game length for me, but it makes the competition just so much fun.
Cool. Yeah, and you know what? I used to think that I liked Feast. Like I used to feel pretty strongly about preferring it with 2 over any other count. And when we played it recently with 3, it actually went reasonably quickly, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I'm not sure I agree with you that 3 is my favorite, but I think with 2 and 3 is like probably the sweet spot either way, where the game shines most. We tried it once with 4 players on Tabletop Simulator, I think a couple of years ago, and the game went on pretty long. I wouldn't personally seek out playing it at 4 again. I think if everyone knew how to play and had played it before, you could get it done.
Maybe on BGA with everyone knowing how to play.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you're doing like a turn-based asynchronous game, then like the added competition for the spots without having all the downtime of waiting
could be cool.
Could be cool, yeah. But I have to, like, you know, and I've been trying to be as fair as possible. I've given the nod to A Feast for Odin in a couple other categories, even though it's just killed me to do it. But in player scaling, to me, Agricola is the clear winner because of the fact that the game feels a lot more different and feels like it's been scaled, like that the game was designed more with player scaling in mind across the counts, because not only are there the action card, like all the occupation cards, there's ones that are just for 2 players, then there's another set of them that you add in if you have at least 3 players, then there's another set of cards that you add in if you have at least 4 players. And then most importantly, what changes the game a lot, and what has kind of been part of the reason why I've been able to play this game like 130 plus times, is that depending on the player count, there's different action spaces available on the board. And they're becoming available in different order depending on which kind of like rounds between harvests you have. So based on what actions are available, you know, in a 2-player game compared to a 4-player game, certain resources might be higher in demand or easier to find, or you might be competing more for growing your family or whatever. So it feels like a different game. We talked about, I think you noticed this too when we played Agricola with 3 players, how in a 3-player game, reed as a resource is so tough to come by. So even in the draft, when you're drafting cards, in 3 players, you might be more leaning towards drafting those cards that say, like, every time you do this, you get a reed, or you get a reed discount when you're building rooms. You have to factor that in when you're playing with 3 players, whereas if I'm playing with 2 or 4, it's a lot easier to get reads, so I might pick different occupations instead. So not only the choices that you make, but the way the game plays out and the amount of tension over different spots, it feels like you're having to evaluate everything a little bit differently based on the player count, and that's something that I absolutely love about Agricola. I think it works super well at all player counts, 2, 3, and 4. I think it's probably best at 4 and then 3, but it's still very good at 2. It just ends up being more of that cutthroat back and forth duel, and that's where you want to have a bit more of similar skill level between players going into a 2-player game of Agricola.
Yeah, Agricola definitely scales the player counts better, and I think that that's even evident by the fact that the only expansion that's out for Feast for Odin, that's like the biggest thing they address. Right. They probably recognized that they needed to have more variety between the player counts for the board to not have it be too overwhelming or too open at 2. So I will say that at least with, like, you do have the option with Feast that if you buy the expansion, suddenly you're going to have a way better scaled experience, and that's why I'm so excited to get the expansion, because it really fixes that, whereas Agricola you get out of the box. So I've heard a lot of people say Norwegians is almost like not required. Like, it's not like this isn't a good game without it, but like once you get it, you're never going to want to not play with the Norwegians. So Agricola, you kind of get that out of the box. So I'll give that nod to Agricola, but at least you have the option to go get Norwegians, and then Agricola's got nothing.
Wow, Lindsay's got nothing. Guys even played.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, and our final main category here now is replay value. Obviously, I mentioned already, I've played Agricola over 130 times. Then I stopped playing it I hadn't played it for a couple of years again until recently. I've been kind of rediscovering it on Board Game Arena. And man, this game still holds up so well. I wondered for a while, we did our top 50 games of all time not long ago, and Agricola was my number 1, and I kept thinking, is it just because I played it so many times? That was so many years ago. I've barely played it in the last few years. But no, it holds up so well still, and I can see myself just kind of going down the rabbit hole again on Board Game Arena, just exploring this, especially because there's like a lot of people playing online in a more competitive sense, or kind of this meta that sort of develops on Board Game Arena. I haven't obviously played A Feast for Odin anywhere near as much yet, so it's hard for me to comment. Like, I don't feel like I'm tired of it or anything, but it's tough for me to envision playing A Feast for Odin like 100 plus times and feeling that same feeling that I do going back to it as I still do with Agricola. Of course, there's going to be some bias because of how important Agricola was to me as a game, like early on as a gamer, and just kind of like the nostalgia factor. But
I was going to say, I think the most interesting thing about this category, I think both games have great replay value, and I think Feast for Odin, with all the different options you can explore, you can play this game so many times and approach it differently every time, and get different cards and everything. So I think they have the replay value, but I think that what's interesting about this debate for us specifically is that Agricola is specifically tied like really one-in-one tied to nostalgia for you because it was one of your first board games that you got into.
Oh, for sure.
You played it so many times in a time in your life where you were able to play it very often, very quickly with the
Sometimes
same
2 or
people.
3 times in the same day. Like.
Right. Whereas Feast, I actually have no nostalgia tied to Feast. I got Feast when I was getting into board games, but I don't have these certain memories tied with like, remember this session or whatever. I just really enjoy the game without the nostalgia. But like, I can think of video games that I have nostalgia tied to that I know I'm getting influenced by nostalgia. So what's interesting to me is that I'm curious over time, like let's say 5 years from now, whether you still have Agricola as your number one because you can't separate the nostalgia from it, and whether I have moved Feast for Odin down, not because I like it less, but just because I'm able, or maybe because in comparison to other games, I like it a little bit less because I don't have that nostalgia tied to it. Nostalgia is a very strong emotion that it's very, very, very hard to separate from things usually.
Totally.
I know that firsthand, and I think you do as well. So there is a difference in how we approach these games in our lives. So I think that's going to be interesting to see over time, like how hard it's going to be harder for you to bump Agricola down from number one than it's going to be for me.
I think so.
So
what's the key aspect of a Feast for Odin that like works in its favor for replay value?
I think
like,
it's
brings
that
you back most, thinking like, oh, I could just play this game forever.
I think that literally the last 8 times I played this, I have had a different strategy every single time.
Right.
So I think that it's a game you can come back to, and even if you go into I'm going to go into the island boards, it can still be different because you can get different island boards. You can get them early, you can get them later. You can, when you get that island board, you could say, I'm going to get this to really go into income. Actually, I'm going to ignore the income on this island board right away, and I'm just going to get all the bonus icons because I want to get all these bonuses.
Right.
So there's so many different tweaks on the strategy that every time you play, you can say, hey, if I play a lot of Feast lately, the way I'm going to keep this interesting to myself is I'm going to adjust my strategy and do this, or I got these certain cards, this is pushing me a direction I've never gone. So the replay value is less about like whereas Agricola, it's about the tightness of the experience and like how best can I optimize and how am I going to react to my opponent and everything. And sometimes you're doing some of the same things, but it's still interesting because you're getting the replay value a different way. Feast is you're approaching it relatively differently every single time. And as I've mentioned in many other videos, that's something I love in games, whether it's because you have a large deck of cards that you're going through in a deck builder, or whether that's because you have a bunch of board replacement spots. I like going to a game and having a completely different experience and not being able to like refine a strategy essentially.
Right.
So yeah.
And it sounds like we have like similar but different reasons, because for you it's the openness of I can try whatever I want, and for me with Agricola it's because there's so many cards in the Occupation and Minor Improvements deck, every time you play you're going to have a different combination of those 7 and 7. You're never going to end up with, like, it's super low chance of having those same 14 cards, and for me it's that puzzle of looking at it and figuring out what are going to be my main cards, which ones am I going to try to play early, which ones am I going to save for later, how am I going to get these all played and maximize the amount of points, because most of the time you end up playing 4, 5, 6 of these total cards and you have more than half of them still in your hand at the end. So for me that's what brings me back to it over and over is that hand of cards, and sometimes the draft itself can be almost as fun as the actual game in Agricola.
Yeah. So that's it for the topics.
I
just because I sometimes I think that maybe you think that it's just me and my rabid base of all you can board supporters that believe in Team Feast and
Sorry,
and
rabid, where are they?
They're there. They're around. They're cheering in front of their computers right now for me. So I actually went out of my way to go find a couple familiar faces that agree that not only is Feast for Odin the better game of the two, but it's actually also, in their case, the favorite game that they have ever played. Oh. And we're going to roll that
Wait, what
clip.
do you mean also? It's not your favorite?
Well, we haven't done this year's 2022 top 50 list. We're already past the top 50 list. We don't know what's going to happen next year. You know what? Roll the clip.
How could we not agree with Dylan? Because A Feast for Odin is our number one game
of all time.
Of all time. And who are we? We are Amy and Maggie from ThinkerThemer. Yes. And we generally have quite different tastes in games, but this is one thing we agree on in life and in gaming.
Yeah, probably the only thing that we agree on.
Yeah. Is A Feast for Odin. I personally love in this game that you start with all those negative victory points. So the tension right from the beginning is so palpable. Yeah. And you never feel like you're going to even cover your board, let alone go out to the islands.
Yeah. And I love how many different paths to victory there are. You can focus on whatever you want. You can go on an animal strategy. You can go farming. You can go and sail your ships. You can emigrate. There's just so many different things. It's like 20 games in one.
It is. And the worker placement. We love worker placement.
Yes.
And all of the choices are always so difficult because you're trying to second guess whether someone else is going to take your spot first or not. The number of workers that you want to use in one turn.
Going shopping for jewels.
Love shopping for jewels.
Or forging your jewels.
So good.
Polyomino. I mean, come on. There's everything.
There's everything. Look, we are big fans of Uwe Rosenberg, and this is a great head-to-head, but we do have to give it to a feast for Odin on this occasion because it is our favourite game.
Yeah.
In case we haven't mentioned, it's our favourite game. But wanted to say congratulations on your recent 2-year anniversary. We love what you're doing with your channel. And, you know, even if you are arguing over Uwe, you know, be kind to each other because... Ultimately, this is the best first world problem
Exactly.
ever.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
of these
What a
awesome
privilege.
games are we
Yes.
going to play?
Yes.
Look forward to meeting you in 2022. Bye for now.
Bye.
Wow, okay. You know, Amy and Maggie are so nice, it's kind of hard to say anything in disagreement with it, but I will just say it sounds like they maybe even haven't played Agricola. To have that opinion. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I respect that, and of course, A Feast for Odin is an amazing game, but I also reached out to someone in support and was able to get some words of support advocating for the correct best game. So how about we roll that clip now?
Hello everyone, my name is Jeff from a little channel called Foster the Meeple, and I am here to defend Carlo's honor in the Agricola versus Feast for Odin debate against his nemesis Dylann, the creator of Sky Cup. If you don't know what that is, you will find out soon. All right, Dylann, why Agricola is far superior to Feast for Odin is because in Agricola, you actually have options and different things you can do in order to achieve victory. And I know you're going to say you can also do that in Feast for Odin, but let me get to that later. In Agricola, you can garden, you can raise animals, you can decide when to have children and whether or not that's important for you in order to have more workers, in order to dominate the board a little bit more. It's a little bit more cutthroat with space selection because there are only so many selections that you can take, unlike Feast for Odin where there's a million. And my major issue with Feast for Odin is that at base game, all you really need to do in order to succeed is to get a longship, raid and pillage a few times, and then emigrate your boats and score points. And I know that you're going to be like, yeah, but you can get cows and sheep and blah, blah. No one takes that strategy in Feast for Odin at base game. They just don't, because if they did, they would lose to the people that are raiding, pillaging, and flipping their boats for points. So there you have it. Unfortunately for you, Carlo and I are correct in this instance. Agricola, far, far superior to Feast for Odin at base game. Again, not talking about expansions. So that's it. That's it. There's no more argument to be made. My name's Jeff from Foster the Meeple. Thank you so much to Carlo for having me on and allowing me to support his incredible argument as to why Agricola is far superior to Feast for Odin. Later days.
Wow, okay. Well, I mean, we're obviously huge fans of Foster the Meeple, but I can't say I'm not disappointed that Jeff has chosen the wrong side of the fence to stake his claim here.
Well, Jamie has referred to Agricola as Agricola.
Perfect.
So you can at least know that you have Jamie's support.
Jamie,
but thank you, Jeff, for being on the right team.
When we meet up at a convention, we'll let Carlo and Jeff go farm, and we'll go and be Vikings and travel the land and have a way more entertaining time. And soon,
you and Jamie can eat silver together with Amy and Maggie. We're gonna have a big banquet full of
that's
silver.
That's what's gonna happen. We're gonna all of us, ThinkerThemer, Foster the Meeple, all you can board. We're all gonna go to a restaurant at a convention, and it's gonna be Carlo and Jeff having pasta and chicken and everything. The rest of us are gonna be over here just chomping on silver and enjoying.
Yeah, or I can just send you off to the market. Yeah, enjoy buying food while we eat.
Perfect. Okay. Well, great clips. Thank you both to Foster the Meeple and to ThinkerThemer for sending those clips in.
Thank you both. That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so now just a couple final things we want to talk about just in comparing the games. Obviously, if you're someone who hasn't played them or you've played one and maybe not the other and you kind of want the bigger distinction between the two, I think the main thing here is, again, just like how punishing and tight and unforgiving Agricola is compared to the open, kind of more sandbox nature of A Feast for Odin. Agricola, you do have kind of certain things that you have to get done every game. Like, you have to make room for family members. You have to grow your family. You have to have a certain number of food or a way to feed your family. You you can't just get 0 in all of the categories and get -1 in all of them. Like, there's certain things that you have to do with the other players, and you are forced to compete over certain action spaces, and that's undeniable. The cards will point you in different directions, of course, and you're still going to end up with different looking farms, but the game is sort of like forcing you to interact maybe more than a lot of people would want to in this game. And it has just a very steep learning curve.
Yeah, I won't even add anything else on there. I think that's a great way to sum them up, and I just prefer this style, or Carlo just prefers that one, but they're just two distinct different types of experiences in that way.
Yep.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think that's all I can think of in terms of final comparisons. What about you?
That's it. I think that what we should do is a little segment we've added here where I am now going to say something I really like about Agricola that I think it does better than Feast for Odin, and I'll let you do the same thing. And in this, we're not allowed to put down the other game at all. So I will say that Agricola is obviously a much tighter game and it has way better cards, and both of those things are more or I wouldn't say the tighter is necessarily because it's more interesting than Feast for Odin strategy, but I will say that it is something that Feast for Odin just doesn't have, and I do enjoy those types of games. There's a lot of games I like that have these tighter experiences that you have to really optimize, and that when you win because of that, or when you do something really well, it feels way more earned, and it feels like you have to really fight for that. Agricola will have that a little bit more than Feast for Odin will, and the card play is just more interesting because you start off with more of them. If at Feast for Odin you started with 12 cards, this might not be something that I'm even bringing up, but it is probably my favorite aspect of Agricola is the very start of the game when you look at your hand of cards and you say, what is my strategy going to be? That is something that reminds me of Res Arcana and other games I've played where it really dictates things from the start. Agricola does that, and that's something I love in games, so the fact that Feast doesn't have that means that edges it out for Agricola for me.
I'm so proud of this guy. I'm so proud. Oh, just
talk about my
amazing.
game.
Okay, so what I will say is Agricola, even though I love it as much as I do, we've talked about the nostalgia thing and how many times I've played it. In my opinion, a Feast for Odin, like if you haven't played either game, I can almost guarantee for almost everyone who just played both games once, you're going to enjoy a Feast for Odin more. Even if I think back to like, it wasn't like I played Agricola my first time and thought this is the greatest game ever. It took play after play after play to start feeling that like feel of, oh, maybe next time I can do better. Oh, I didn't get everything accomplished that I wanted to. Even if I compare my 4th or 5th play of Feast for Odin, at that point, I might have liked a Feast for Odin more after 4 or 5 plays than I liked Agricola after 4 or 5 plays. So I think the huge advantage I would give to a Feast for Odin here is that if you're the type of person who doesn't want to play the same game over and over, or like get right into the deep strategy of something, if you have a big collection, you want to have games that you play once in a while kind of thing, a Feast for Odin is probably the better choice, because if you're only gonna play Agricola once, twice, even 4 or 5 times, even maybe 10, 20 times, like you're never going to reach the maximum enjoyment that this game has to offer because of how steep the learning curve is and how punishing of a game it is. So if you just want something to play every once in a while, or it's not going to be like one of your go-to games with your gaming group, I would definitely give the nod to a Feast for Odin.
All right.
It makes the bigger first impression, definitely.
I'd agree. Perfect. One thing I will say, because I don't want to forget, is if you are in our Discord, and if you're not, you can find the link in the description below. We are adding in 2 brand new roles that you can opt into. One is going to be for Team Agricola, one is going to be for Team Feast. So you can now, in our Discord, show your allegiance for Team Feast or Team Agricola. We'll leave these roles up, I think, indefinitely. If over time we want to remove them, we can, but really it's just going to change your color on the Discord. So I think we might adjust some of the colors a little bit so that we can have Feast have more of like a color that associates it with here, maybe like a light blue, and Agricola can have like a lighter orange or something like that. But you'll see them on there. You'll be able to opt in, so you can wear your pride for one of these games loud and proud on there, and take your side. And we might even I'm gonna see if I can, by the time I post this video, even make up a couple little emotes for Agricola and for Feast, so you can also reply to different comments with them. So
love it.
Yeah.
And yeah, this might change in the future, especially once we've played La Havre and Caverna and some of these other Uwe Rosenberg games. But for now, we feel pretty strongly about these 2.
Yeah. This has been awesome. This is a long time coming, obviously. We have 2 different sides of the coin here, but we both enjoy both these games. So we're really curious, obviously, for you guys to let us know in the comments which one you side with. And again, reminder that if you side with a game in the comments, you don't even have to give a reason, but you can if you want. You'll automatically be entered into our contest. If you don't want to be entered into the contest for one reason or another, just let us know. This is not part for an entry. You just want to comment. Otherwise, you're automatically entered. We will respond to one comment on March 7th and let them know that they have been selected as the winner, and we will send you either one of these games that you want, or if you have both already, a different game, Uwe game of your choice, and we'll ship it directly to you as an extra thanks. And this is our extra thanks for helping us get to 10K and for finally doing this video that everyone's been anticipating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks so much for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
We had a great time, and we will see you in the next time. See you in the next one. And you know why I stumbled there? Because I was planning to say we'll see you in the next one. Feast for Odin's the best game, and I was going to end it, and I tripped myself up. So it just goes to show
that
I need
pleasant discussion. Yeah. This is where the trash talk should be stopping now. It
I
should be
know.
put to bed.
See, that's why I stumbled. That's my own fault. Yeah. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.